terrorists, including our military officers and intelligence service. And of course, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just promised Pakistan another $500 million in aid. Gareth.
Well, what the ambassador is doing here, of course, is exactly what U.S. officials have done over the past year or so, which is to talk about the militants in Pakistan as though, without differentiating between the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani neo-Taliban, to talk about the fact that, yes, the Pakistani government has made progress in dealing with the militants in Pakistan. Well, yes, they have. They've changed their policy significantly in terms of dealing with the Pakistani Taliban, but they have not changed their policy with regard to the Afghan Taliban. That's quite clear. And what you have, it's very interesting, the Obama administration just issued an 8-page paper yesterday which responds to this story, which is made up solely of public statements by U.S. officials over the past year and a half or so about this question of U.S. policy toward Pakistan and the Taliban. And what you find in these statements is utter unwillingness to specifically say right out loud that Pakistan is not only not cooperating with the United States on this issue, but there's no reason to believe that they're going to, because they don't believe it's in their interest to cooperate with the United States against the Taliban.
I wanted to go back to Stephen Gray in London, who spent the part of the weekend with Julian Assange, who's released these documents, the founder of WikiLeaks. In a minute, I want to ask you, Stephen, and also go to Dan Ellsberg, about how Julian Assange is being hounded as he travels the world. But first, the special forces, talk more about 373, Task Force 373.
Absolutely. It hasn't been much disclosed before. I did actually write about it in this book I wrote, a chapter called The Manhunt, because what I noticed is that this war is divided into the public version, if you like, the softer hearts and minds stuff. But if you look at the history of counterinsurgency, you'll know that actually counterinsurgency is not a soft option. And therefore, there is this unseen side of the war, which actually has become more and more dominant, which is basically the manhunt. You have these kill or capture units. They change their code names regularly, but Task Force 373 has been one of those units. And what they're doing is systematically going around and, well, they call it decapitation, removing the sort of the head of this organization that they call the Taliban, and thinking that that will destabilize the Taliban and win. Of course, under the laws of war.
We just lost Stephen Gray, but we're going to go back to him in a minute. Let me ask the question to Rick Rowley about Task Force 373, about the whole issue of this Special Forces war.
Yeah, well, I think journalists like Jeremy Scahill and others have been tracking this for a while, that as the nation-building project fails in Afghanistan, and I mean, this year was supposed to be the year of nation-building. Marja was supposed to be the prelude to Kandahar. Both of those have been rebranded, canceled, completely dramatically changed. There's been a massive escalation of a second option, which is the Special Forces war, an entirely covert war. So, I mean, and you're seeing this publicly discussed now. This is the sign of the future. There was the recent Newsweek on it. There's people publicly in the administration talking about this. When we abandon the nation-building project, which everyone recognizes is an abject failure, the new paradigm the war is going to take is drone strikes and special forces raids and midnight assassinations and capturing and abducting people. I mean, if you look at the press releases every day, every week that NATO and ISAF put out, you can see that the majority of the kinetic action, the military calls it, the majority of the people killed and captured are done by special forces. So there is no real information about them at all. It's all entirely secret. And these are just the ones that are made public. Many more of them aren't made public. These documents that were released, they occasionally cover, in slant ways, cover special forces operations. But all of that stuff is a different level of classified. So, I mean, it's absolutely true that there are two parallel parallel wars going on. There's the war for hearts and minds, which is increasingly just a distraction that the media have access to, where they have a very restricted rules of engagement, where they don't use as many airstrikes. And then there's a special forces war where it's you know, all systems go, where there aren't the same restrictions, where they routinely kill people who don't represent the same kind of, don't reach the same kind of threat level that they would have to in the conventional war. So I think this is going to be one of the most significant stories going forward into the future, is tracking through these documents how the evolution of this new kind of war there.
Stephen Gray, you were just getting into Task Force 373.
Yeah, I'm not sure quite where you lost me there, but I was just saying that there's a parallel war, and 373 is involved in what they call decapitation operations. They believe that the Taliban as an organization can be defeated by removing its head, and that getting rid of all these leaders will destabilize and help them to win. But it's actually a very conventional way of viewing things, and it goes completely counter to the idea of actually having a peace settlement. Because if you remove the leadership of an organization, you have no one to negotiate with, and you end up with a sort of constantly rejuvenated rebellion, which I think is what it is, of more and more extreme people. So it's very questionable whether this thing is actually you know, productive at all, even in this very conventional way. I mean, I think what comes across overall is that the war is being fought in a very conventional way, despite what's being said. You know, there's all this talk of, it's always about how many enemy did we kill. It's all seen in a very sort of, you know, as if it's kind of like a World War II situation. You know, you really wonder whether the lessons have been learned. I also think that even the talk of Pakistan, and I think that's it's an example of the US being played. I think there's a lot of paranoia there. They're being fed information by Afghan intelligence, where they get most of their intelligence from, you know, and they see it as this great sanctuary. If only we, you know, weren't, it's just like Vietnam, they say, you know, if only we could cross the border, you know, and defeat that sanctuary, somehow this would all go away. I don't think it's like that. I think it's a very complex problem, and I think a lot of it's to do with a straightforward rebellion and unpopularity of the Afghan government, which the US is supporting. As
I said, as we're broadcasting, Julian Assange is holding a news conference in London. Let's just go to a clip of that news conference right now with the founder of WikiLeaks, who released this unprecedented 92,000 pages of documents.
I suppose our greatest fear is that we will be too successful too fast, and we won't be able to do justice to the material we're getting in fast enough. That's our greatest problem at the moment.
Do you accept that secrecy is an important and necessary part of government?
Secrecy is sometimes perfectly legitimate. For example, your medical records with your doctor are probably, in all likelihood, perfectly entitled to confidentiality. But not always. There'll be some cases where that is not true.
So you make a choice that you, WikiLeaks, would make a choice?
This is a matter about whether the